I want to start by saying that I have been doing deep survey work for 11 years. 11 years. That is not a short career in this field. You do 11 years of deep survey, and you have seen things that most people only hear about in training seminars. You have seen dead moons with atmospheres that taste like copper and methane. You have seen generation ships cracked open by asteroid debris, contents spilled into space like broken eggs, and you float past the wreckage and you file your report, and you move on because that is what you do in this work. You develop a kind of professional distance from things. That distance is necessary. Without it, you cannot function. Without it, every dead signal and every debris field and every silent, spinning object in the dark becomes something personal, and if you let it become personal, you are finished. You put in your transfer request and you go work somewhere else, somewhere with gravity and windows that open and food that does not come out of a compression unit. I had professional distance. I was good at it. I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened. I want you to understand that I am not the kind of person who is affected by things easily. I am not the kind of person who writes emotional field logs. I keep my logs precise. Thal survey log, day 1, sector reference, anomaly classification, signal strength, material composition estimate. Clean, professional, done. This log is not going to look like that. This log is not going to look like anything I have written before, and I am going to write it honestly because I have been told by the Archival Council that this record matters, and I believe them, and I think honesty is the only way to do it justice. So, day 1 of contact, we were in the outer rim of what the charts designate as Sector 7 Theta margin, which is a navigational way of saying we were a long way from anywhere interesting. The margin is not a popular assignment. It is not populated. It is not trafficked by any significant commercial routes, and the scientific value of the region has historically been classified as low to minimal. The rocks out there are old, very old. Geologically interesting in an academic sense, but not in the sense of actually yielding anything worth the fuel expenditure of the survey run. We were out there because survey rotations require you to cover every section of the assigned grid, interesting or not. Our survey fleet commander, a Velthrian named Essen Voss, had the personality of a compressed data file and the conversational warmth of a hull breach, and she was extremely thorough. We covered every section. We did not skip. We did not fudge numbers. Essen Voss checked everything twice and then made a junior specialist check it a third time just to be sure. I was the junior specialist who checked things a third time. It was me, doing the third check on passive sensor sweep 7 Theta margin subsection 14, when I picked up the anomaly. It was not dramatic. I want to be clear about that. The moment of discovery was not cinematic. I was sitting at my secondary station, drinking something warm that was supposed to be broth, but tasted like the memory of broth. Like someone had described broth to the compression unit, and the unit had done its best, and I was running the sweep results through the standard filtering protocol when the numbers stopped making sense. The anomaly read as metal. Not rock metal, the kind of metallic mineral composition you find in asteroids all over this part of space. This was processed metal, refined alloys, and the configuration was not natural. Not a crashed probe, not debris fragments. The density and the geometry suggested a single continuous structure, roughly cylindrical, approximately 4.2 meters in length and 1.8 meters in diameter. Small, remarkably small. I flagged it and sat there for a moment looking at the flag. Then I pinged Essen Voss. Her response was, and I am quoting directly from the communication log, "Send me the readings." Not "are you sure," not "run it again." Not any of the usual responses you get when you flag something unusual, just "send me the readings." I sent her the readings. There was a pause, 14 seconds, which is a long pause for Essen Voss. I counted. Then hold position. I'm coming to secondary station. She came. She looked at the readings herself. She pulled up the raw sensor data and went through it line by line, which took a while, and I sat there finishing the broth memory and watching her face, which was doing almost nothing, because Velthrian faces do almost nothing even when Velthrians are deeply interested in something. Their emotional expression is mostly in their secondary limbs, the small ones near the shoulder joint, and Essen Voss's secondary limbs were doing a thing I had only seen them do once before, during a significant navigational emergency about 3 years ago. They were trembling, very slightly, but trembling. "Processed alloy," she said finally. "Yes. Not cataloged. Not in any database I can find. Configuration is," she paused, "deliberate. I think so." She straightened up. She did the thing she did when she was shifting from analysis mode into command mode, this subtle squaring of the shoulders that I had learned to recognize over 3 years working under her. "Wake Kess and Dahlan," she said. "We are going in for close approach." Chapter 2, Testimony of Navigation Officer KESS OMALVTH. GEA Research Vessel Severance Bloom. Recorded, Day 4 of contact, following initial processing period. So Orvine wakes me up, right? And I want to be honest about my first reaction, which was not enthusiasm. I was in the middle of a sleep cycle and I had been working a long rotation, and my first reaction was essentially, whatever it is, it can wait. But Orvine has a very specific tone of voice when something is actually worth waking up for. It is a very controlled, careful voice, like she is being deliberate about keeping the excitement out of it, and when I heard that voice, I sat up. "Close approach," she said. "Anomalous structure. Essen wants everyone on deck." I pulled on my suit and got to the flight deck in under 4 minutes, which is faster than I usually move before my first stimulus dose. Dahlan was already there. Dahlan is always already there. I have never in my life beaten Dahlan to a deck. I don't think Dahlan sleeps in the conventional sense. And Essen Voss was at the primary console doing what she always did, which was being approximately 9 steps ahead of everyone else. The object on the long-range visual was not much to look at. That was my first thought. We had swung the secondary optical array around to get a visual, and the thing in the image was just small, dark, tumbling very slowly end over end. The lighting out in that part of the margin was thin. We were a long way from the nearest stellar body, so it was mostly catching our own survey lights, and what the survey lights showed was a cylinder, roughly the size of a small personal transport module, covered in a very thick layer of impact scarring, and what appeared to be some kind of coating residue. "What is that on the exterior?" Dahlan asked. Dahlan is a Morith, and Morith have this quality of stating questions very flatly, without any inflection, so it always comes out sounding like a challenge even when it isn't. "Unknown," Essen Voss said. "Possibly ablative coating." "Heat shield." "Possibly." "It went through something hot to get here," Dahlan said, still flat. "Or was launched through something hot," Orvine said. None of us said the obvious thing. We all thought it. An ablative heat shield, a deliberate structure, a size consistent with a small crew vehicle or an escape module. We all thought it. None of us said it. Essen Voss brought us to 500 meters, and we ran a full active sensor sweep. And that is when things became significantly more interesting. Because the active sweep picked up what the passive sweep had not. First, the internal structure was intact. The cylinder was not hollow empty. It had interior divisions which suggested room-like compartments, 2 of them separated by a partition. Small. Very small. Not enough room to stand up in, probably, depending on the size of whatever species built it. Second, there were traces of what the sensor system initially classified as unusual organic residue on the interior. But when Dahlan ran the readings through the bioscience filter, the classification changed. Biological signature. Not residue, not trace, Biological signature, present tense. Dahlin read the result and then read it again. "It is not dead," she said, in that flat Morith voice. Nobody moved. "The biological signature is weak," she said. "Very weak, but it is not a dead organic reading. It is not trace residue. There is a metabolic process occurring inside that structure." "Hibernative?" Essen Voss asked. "Consistent with?" "Yes." Essen Voss turned and looked at the viewport. The little tumbling cylinder was right there in it, catching our survey lights, spinning very slowly, patient as a stone. "How long?" Essen Voss asked. Dahlin ran the calculation. "Based on isotopic decay analysis of the whole surface and the estimated original composition of the ablative coating," she paused, "approximately 412 years. I heard Orvine make a sound next to me. It was not a professional sound. It was the sound of a person being struck somewhere soft. 412 years. Something had been alive in that thing for over 400 years. Chapter 3. Field Notes of Xenobiologisti Doulun Marsh. GEA Research Vessel Severance Bloom. Personal record, not official log, submitted to Archival Council on voluntary basis. Note, these are my personal notes. I kept them separately from my official logs because my official logs are data and these are not data. These are the other thing. I am including them here because the Council asked for everything, and I believe in completeness. I should clarify something about the 412-year estimate. When I gave that number, I gave it with what I considered appropriate confidence. The isotopic methodology is sound. The margin of error is plus or minus approximately 30 years, which in the context of 4 centuries is negligible. I stand by the number. What I do not stand by, what I could not have stood by, because nothing in my training prepared me for it, is what it meant. 400 years of suspension. Whatever hibernative technology was in use inside that module had maintained a living organism in a metabolically suppressed state for over 4 centuries. That is not a technology I had encountered in any species catalog. Not Velthrian, not Morith, not any of the 12 species currently operating within galactic common protocols. The closest analog in recorded xenobiology was the Sothran metabolic dormancy, and even that topped out at approximately 60 years before cellular degradation became irreversible. So either the organism inside the module had biological properties unlike anything in the known catalog, or the technology sustaining it was significantly more advanced than we had assumed from the exterior. Or both. I had a feeling it was going to be both. Essen Voss made the decision not to approach the module immediately after the biological reading. This was correct procedure. We were dealing with a potential unknown species, a closed vessel, unknown atmosphere, unknown pathogen profile, and an organism in an unknown state of consciousness. Protocol requires a full risk assessment, a containment plan, and authorization from the fleet oversight before any physical contact. Essen Voss was meticulous. She filed the contact report within the hour. She documented everything. She began the authorization request process immediately. The authorization took 6 days. During those 6 days, we held position relative to the module and we watched it. We ran non-invasive scans at regular intervals. The biological signature remained stable, weak but stable. The tumbling rotation of the module slowed slightly as our survey vessel's gravitational presence influenced it minor, but enough that by day 3 it was barely rotating at all, almost still. On day 4, I noticed something on the high-resolution optical scan of the module's exterior that I had not flagged in my initial assessment. Text. Not symbols, not a pictographic script. Characters of a kind that were clearly alphabetical, individual unit characters, probably representing phonemic sounds, stamped or etched into the hull plating near what I estimated to be the front end of the module. The characters were partially obscured by impact scarring and the residue of the ablative coating, but they were there. I photographed them. I sent the images to Essen Voss and to the communications and language specialist we had on board, a young Velthrian named Tash who was 4 years out of academy and extremely good at their job. Tash stared at the images for a long time. "Unknown script," they said finally, "but structured. This is alphabetical. I can see spacing consistent with individual words. There are at least 2 distinct word units here. Can you read it?" "Not yet." Tash looked up. "But I can try to build a partial translation framework if the Council can cross-reference against any known pre-contact scripts in the Deep Archive." We sent the images to the Council archive. The response came back in 11 hours. The script had a partial match. Fragmentary, imprecise, but present, in the Deep Archive category, designated uncontacted biological pre-survey species, a classification that covered species identified by remote sensor as biologically active on their home world, but not yet reached by any survey fleet. The species designation in the archive was listed simply as H7741. And the partial translation, fragmentary, uncertain. The Council noted this multiple times. Of the 2 visible word units on the hull appeared to be something like Delta Shelter. Chapter 4, Communication Log Transcript. GEA Research Vessel Severance Bloom to GEA Fleet Oversight, Sector Command. Day 6 of contact, authorization received. Oversight, Severance Bloom, authorization granted for physical contact approach. Approach to be conducted with Level 4 biological containment protocols active. No penetration of vessel exterior until Level 4 is confirmed and active. You are to document everything. Everything. Is that understood? SNVOSS, understood command. Oversight. The pre-contact archive designation for this species, H7741, was last updated approximately 430 years ago based on remote long-range sensor readings from a survey pass that did not make contact. At that time, the species was assessed as biologically active on a single home world in a distant system. We have no direct observational data on their physical characteristics, their technology, or their behavioral profile. SNVOSS, understood. Oversight. What you may be looking at is a member of a species that we have never encountered directly. We do not know how they communicate. We do not know their social structures. We do not know whether they are hostile. We do not know whether they carry pathogens that are cross-species transmissible. We do not know, frankly, very much at all. SNVOSS, acknowledged. That is why I requested Level 4 authorization. Oversight, proceed carefully, Commander. SNVOSS, always. Chapter 5, Field Log of Survey Specialist ORVENTHAL, continued. Day 7 of contact, physical approach. The approach took the whole morning. Not because the distance was significant. By day 6, we had matched the module's drift trajectory and were holding steady at 150 meters. But because Essen Voss does not rush anything, and Level 4 biological containment protocols are not a thing you rush. They are a thing you do with absolute precision, or you do not do them at all. Kess piloted the approach shuttle manually. Nobody questioned this. Kess has the best manual approach record in the fleet, and we all knew it and nobody needed to say so. The shuttle was a small 2-person craft that we used for close inspection work, and we had fitted it out with the containment array before we launched, which meant the passenger compartment smelled faintly of sterilization, compound, and felt slightly pressurized in the way things feel when the containment field is running. Essen Voss and I were in the back. Dahlen was at the shuttle's secondary sensor station, which meant she was watching the biological readings from the module in real time. Signature is unchanged, she said as we closed to 50 meters. Whatever metabolic process is occurring in there, our approach is not affecting it. It doesn't know we're here, Kes said from the front. It may not be capable of knowing anything at the moment, Dahlan said. Deep hibernative suppression. 20 meters. The module was right there now, filling the forward viewport. Up close it was different, more real. The scale of the impact scarring was more apparent. Some of those micro-impact craters were old, genuinely old, pocked into the hull in layers that suggested centuries of accumulated drift through particle-dense regions of space. There were places where the original hull plating had been deformed, slightly, by something. Forces encountered in transit maybe, or whatever had launched this thing into space in the first place. And there were the marks that Tash had identified as text, starboard side near the front, Delta Shelter, or something like it. There was more text below it, smaller, that the high-resolution optical had picked up, but that was too obscured to translate yet. Numbers, Tash thought, some kind of numerical code. Kes brought us to 3 meters and held station. We looked at it. It looked like whatever it had always looked like. Patient, still, 400 years in the dark, and it still felt like it was waiting for something. Magnetic clamp protocol, Essen Voss said. Kes ran the clamps. 4 soft impacts, magnetic engagement, and we were attached. The shuttle and the module joined. I could feel it slightly through the hull, the physical reality of contact with something that old. Dahlan, Essen Voss said. Signature stable, no change. Kes, are we sealed? Sealed and holding. Essen Voss stood up and put her equipment suit on. I stood up and put mine on. The equipment suits were the second layer of the Level 4 protocol, full environmental isolation, with integrated decontamination systems and translation equipment in the collar. We went to the forward hatch. You understand, Essen Voss said to me quietly, while we waited for the seal check to complete, that whatever is in there may not be in a state to be communicated with. I understand. If it is in hibernation, it may take time to revive. If it has been in hibernation for the duration we estimate, revival may not be. She paused. Her secondary limbs did the trembling thing again. It may not survive the process. I know. I want you to be prepared for that. Are you prepared for that? I asked. She looked at me. Essen Voss does not usually look at people, not directly. She looks at things through them or past them. It is a Velthrian quality. They process visual information differently. But she looked at me. No, she said, I am not. The seal check completed. We opened the hatch. Chapter 6, from the official contact report of Commander Essen VOSS. File Day 9 of contact. Classification, Tier 1 historical contact record. The exterior of the module featured a recessed access panel on its dorsal surface, partially obscured by debris accumulation. Once cleared, the panel revealed a manual release mechanism, not electronic, not biometric, but entirely mechanical in nature. A sequence of rotating discs with position markers. A combination lock. This was significant. The fact that the designers of this module had incorporated a manual mechanical lock, a system that requires no power source and cannot be disabled by electrical interference or systems failure, indicated either a practical engineering philosophy prioritizing redundancy, or a deliberate choice to ensure the module could be accessed by survivors even in total systems failure conditions. I attempted to open the combination lock. I was unsuccessful. The mechanism required knowledge of the correct sequence. Survey Specialist Thal suggested we contact the language specialist on board Severance Bloom. I agreed. We transmitted a high-resolution image of the lock and the surrounding panel markings. Tash, working with the partial translation framework they had developed from the hull text and the archive data, identified what they believed were numerical markings adjacent to the dial positions. Based on a pattern analysis and cross-reference with the archive data, Tash provided a probable sequence. On the second attempt, The lock rotated through to an open position. I want to note here, for the record, the sound that was produced when the lock released. There was a sound of pressure differential equalizing. A very brief exhalation of gas, the internal atmosphere of the module briefly mixing with our containment field atmosphere. The environmental analysis of that gas was later determined to be consistent with a nitrogen-oxygen mixture with specific trace components. This information was filed with the xenobiology team. What I want to note is not the chemical composition. What I want to note is that when the pressure equalized, there was a smell. I am a Velthrian. Our olfactory capacity is not as sophisticated as some species, but even through the suit filtration system, I detected something. I cannot describe it precisely. The closest analogy I can provide is the smell of a space that has been occupied, that carries in it, even after a long time, some residual trace of the organism that lived in it. Not unpleasant, simply present, simply real in a way that the visual evidence of the module's existence had not quite made real yet. Something lived in here, that smell said. Something breathed this air. The hatch swung outward. It moved stiffly, not seized. The mechanism was intact, but stiff in the way of something that has not moved in a very long time. The hinges were well designed. They held. I directed my survey light into the interior. Chapter 7. Continued from Field Log of Survey Specialist ORVENTHAL. I was behind Essen Voss when she opened the hatch. I was looking over her shoulder, which I realize is not the kind of thing you are supposed to admit in an official adjacent document. But I am being honest, and the honest truth is I was craning my neck to see past her because I could not stand not to see. The first compartment was small, exactly as small as the sensor readings had suggested. There was no standing room, whatever creature this was built for. It was either very small or the space was designed for lying down. There were two padded support structures, one on either side of the compartment, roughly parallel to the long axis of the module. Equipment panels on the walls dark, no power. Brackets and storage cavities, some of which held objects I could not immediately identify. A partition wall at the far end with a second hatch. One of the padded support structures was empty. The other was not. The suit I saw first. It was the first recognizable thing, recognizable in the sense that the function was immediately apparent even without prior knowledge of the species, protective covering, environmental control, integrated equipment interfaces. It was not in perfect condition. There were areas of visible damage, repaired, some of the repairs careful and some of them rough and improvised, the kind of repairs you make when you are working with whatever you have available. There were markings on the suit, applied deliberately, some kind of pigment or dye, patterns and symbols that I did not recognize. The figure wearing the suit. I am going to take a moment here. I have been sitting with this document for a while, trying to find a way to describe what I saw that does justice to it. I am not a writer. I am a survey specialist. My job is data collection and analysis. But the council wants this record to be honest, and honest means I have to tell you what it was actually like to look into that compartment and see what was in there. It was a biped. 2 upper limbs, 2 lower limbs, 1 head, bilateral symmetry, roughly similar in proportion to Velthrian body plan but denser, built heavier, more mass in the chest and upper limbs, broader in the shoulder structure. The exposed portions of the face were, I had no reference point. No previously seen images of this species. The archive data had only remote sensor readings, nothing visual. So the face was new. It was asleep, or in some state that looked like sleep. The eyes were closed. The features were still, the way features are still when the body has turned its attention entirely inward to the work of surviving. But here is the thing. Here is the thing that I could not have predicted, that I could not have been prepared for, that hit me somewhere I was not expecting to be hit. Its hands were on the second hatch. Not resting at its sides, not folded. Its hands were on the second hatch between the two compartments, and its body was positioned between the first compartment's hatch, the one we had opened from outside, and that second interior hatch, between the outside world and whatever was behind that second door. It was positioned between. Deliberately positioned. In hibernation, 400 years in the dark, and it had arranged itself between the entrance and the interior partition. Between the outside and whoever was behind the door. I heard Essen Voss make a sound. It was a very small sound. She does not make sounds like that. In 3 years I had never heard her make a sound like that. Orvine, she said, her voice was careful, very careful. Run a biological scan of the second compartment. I already had my scanner out. I ran it. The second compartment had more biological signatures. Not 1, not 2. 6. 6 metabolic traces, all in the same hibernative suppression state as the one in the first compartment, all stable, all present. 6 lives behind a door that the figure in the suit was braced against, hands positioned, body placed deliberately between the outside world and the interior. It's protecting them, I said. I know how that sounds. I know that attributing intentionality to the positioning of a deeply hibernating organism is not scientifically rigorous. I know the positioning could have been coincidental, the result of the last conscious movements before hibernation took hold, not necessarily a deliberate protective stance maintained across 400 years of unconscious sleep. I know all of that. I am telling you what I said. It's protecting them, I said, and Essen Voss did not correct me. Part 2, What Woke and What It Said. Chapter 8, Personal Account of Language Specialist Tash V. Loran. GEA Research Vessel Severance Bloom. Submitted, Day 21 of Contact. When they brought the module aboard, I did not sleep. I want to be clear that this was not unusual for me during high-intensity work periods. I have a tendency to forget to sleep when something has my attention completely, which is something my instructors noted multiple times during my training, and which my supervisor at my first posting noted, and which Essen Voss noted when she assigned me to this survey run, and told me I was required to take 8 hours of rest per standard cycle, minimum, and I agreed. And I broke that agreement approximately 4 times during normal operations, and I broke it for 9 consecutive cycles during the contact period, and I am including this information here, because the council asked for full honesty. The thing that had my attention completely was the language. Even before they brought the module aboard, I had been working on it from the hull text images, 2 word units, Delta Shelter, or something approximating those sounds. My translation framework at that stage was built on the archive data, which was itself built on remote sensor readings from 4 centuries ago that had picked up electromagnetic transmissions from the H7741 home world. Signal transmissions, not decoded, not understood, just recognized as structured communication and filed. Structured communication is something to work with. The archive had approximately 47 hours of recorded H7741 electromagnetic transmissions. They were recordings of what I later came to understand were broadcast communications, transmissions sent widely, not targeted at any specific recipient. The content was varied. Some appeared to be informational, some appeared to be artistic or narrative in nature, some appeared to be interactive communications between multiple speakers. The variation in content was actually helpful. You need variety to build a language framework. A single speaker saying the same thing repeatedly will not get you far. 47 hours is not a lot to work with for a completely unknown language. I want to be transparent about that. Professional xenolinguists working with decades of material struggle to build comprehensive frameworks for unknown languages. 47 hours gets you somewhere, but somewhere is not far. By the time they began the revival process on day 14, I had the following: A phonemic inventory incomplete. A basic grammatical skeleton, very basic, principally word order patterns and some tense indicators, and approximately 240 individual words or word approximations that I could identify with reasonable confidence. 240 words. That is not a conversation. That is a fragment of a conversation. But it was something. It was the most something I had, and I used it. The revival process was Dahlen's domain. The medical and biological complexity of bringing an organism out of 4 centuries of hibernation was not something I was equipped to do anything useful about. What I did during that period was sit at my station and work on the language framework and try not to think about what it would mean if the revival failed. I thought about it anyway. I am only moderately good at not thinking about things. Day 14, Hour 3 of the Revival Protocol. Dahlen contacted me on the direct channel. "It is responding," she said. "Neurological activity is increasing. Essen Voss wants you here." I was there in under 2 minutes. Chapter 9, Medical Log of Xenobiologisti Dolun Marsh. Day 14 of Contact, Revival Protocol Log. Official Record. Hour 0, Revival Protocol initiated. Metabolic suppression compound gradually reversed via targeted cellular stimulation. The organism's biological systems are structurally intact. 4 centuries of suppression have not produced the cellular degradation I had anticipated. The preservation technology integrated into the module's life support system is extraordinary. I am documenting everything. I have filed a separate technical analysis. For this log, the revival is proceeding. Hour 1, circulatory system responding. Respiratory rate increasing from near zero. Body temperature rising at controlled rate. The organism is warm-blooded as the archive data suggested. The thermal profile is consistent with a high metabolic species. Even in dormancy, even in suppression, there is a sense of energy in this body, an impression of something that runs hot, that burns more intensely than its size strictly requires. Hour 2, neural activity increasing, not yet conscious. Still in what I would classify as a transitional state between deep hibernation and sleep. The readings are unlike anything in my reference database. The neural architecture is remarkable, extremely complex, particularly in the regions associated with planning, social bonding, and what I tentatively identify as spatial awareness. Whatever this species evolved to be, it evolved to think about its environment in intricate, multidimensional ways. Hour 2, 47 minutes. The organism's right hand moved. I should not note this in a medical log. Hand movement is a physiological event, not medically significant in itself, but I am noting it because of the nature of the movement. The hand moved toward the partition, toward the door to the second compartment. Not fully awake, not conscious, but in the transitional state between deep hibernation and wakefulness, the first intentional motor action. And the word intentional is something I am using cautiously, but I am using it, was to reach toward the interior door. Hour 3, Essen Voss requested language specialist Tash to be present. I agreed. I have now notified Tash. Hour 3, 12 minutes. The organism opened its eyes. Chapter 10, Personal Account of Language Specialist Tash VLORIN, continued. The eyes were remarkable. That is the first thing I noticed before I noticed anything else, the color. I had no reference for that color, a deep brown, almost amber near the outer edges, very dark at the center, and when they opened and the light hit them for the first time in 4 centuries, there was an intensity to them that was present. Immediately, fully, present in a way I had not expected. This was not an organism coming out of sleep confused and disoriented. Or rather, it was, I could see the disorientation. I could see the biological cost of waking from something that deep written in the face, in the way the muscles were slow to respond, in the shallow, rapid breathing that Dahlin told me was normal for this phase of revival. But through all of that, the eyes were present, alert in some fundamental way that preceded full consciousness. It looked at the ceiling. Then it looked at the partition wall. Then, and this was the moment, it moved. Faster than I expected, much faster than any physiologically reasonable expectation for a body waking from 400 years of suppression. It turned on the support surface and got its hands on the wall and pushed itself upright. And it was looking at the partition with an expression that I could not catalog because I had no reference for this species' expressions, but which communicated something that needed no catalog. Where are they? That was the expression. Where are they, and are they safe? The second compartment had been kept sealed. Dahlin had been very clear that we would not open it until the organism in the first compartment was stable and conscious. She had her reasons. The 6 in the second compartment were in deeper suppression, more fragile, and she wanted to understand the revival process fully before attempting it with multiple subjects simultaneously. The partition was closed. The 6 in the second compartment were still there, still stable, still alive. Dahlin had told me this. I needed to communicate it. I took one step forward. The organism saw me and stopped moving. It looked at me. I cannot overstate how complete that assessment was. I am not projecting intelligence onto it. This is not me being sentimental about first contact. I am telling you what I saw. I saw an organism, freshly awake from 4 centuries of sleep, in an unknown environment, faced with an unknown creature, and I watched it process the situation in approximately 4 seconds and arrive at something that looked remarkably like a tactical evaluation. It looked at me, then it looked at Essen Voss, then at Dahlin, then back at the partition, then at me again. And then it said something. It was rough. The vocal apparatus had not been used in 400 years, and even with Dahlin's revival protocols working correctly, the first sounds were barely words, more like the shape of words, like someone trying to describe a word without quite making it. But I caught it. I had 240 words and a phonemic inventory and 47 hours of recordings running loops in my memory, and I caught it. It was asking a question. It was asking about the people behind the door. Chapter 11. Field Log of Survey Specialist ORVENTHAL. Day 14, Hour 4 of Revival. I watched from the doorway because there was not room in the medical area for all of us, and Essen Voss correctly prioritized Tash and Dahlin. I watched Tash take that step forward. I watched the H7741 organism, and I have to stop calling it that. I cannot maintain that designation through this part of the account, because by day 14 it was no longer a designation to me, and I will explain why in a moment. I watched it assess the situation. It was clearly not well. 4 centuries is not something you wake from easily. Dahlin had explained the physiological cost, the cellular stress of revival, the cardiovascular strain of jump-starting systems that had been at near zero for over 400 years. It should not have been sitting upright. It should not have been moving at all. But it was sitting upright, and the thing it was doing, even in that condition, was looking at the partition and looking at us and calculating something. Tash spoke. I recognized one of the words. I had been listening to Tash practice, because Tash had asked me to listen and give feedback on whether the pronunciation sounded natural, which is a job I am not qualified for but which Tash said helped them to have a witness. The word Tash used was one of the 240, one of the more reliable ones from the archive recordings, a word that appeared in multiple contexts and which Tash had tentatively identified as meaning something like well or safe or unharmed. The organism looked at Tash. A long moment. Then it spoke again. The second attempt was clearer than the first. The vocal systems were warming up. I heard it clearly enough to know it was a question, and Tash later confirmed. It was the same question as the first time. The same question it had woken up asking, the same thing it had positioned itself to ask for 400 years in the dark. The six, the ones behind the door, are they? Tash responded. They used the word for safe. Said it clearly, carefully, with the pronunciation they had practiced. Then they used another word here, or the approximation of it, and gestured toward the partition. The organism in the suit watched Tash very carefully. And then something happened in its face. I have thought about this a great deal. I have thought about it more than almost anything else in this account. The face of a completely unknown species, no reference data, no visual catalog, nothing to interpret the musculature or the expression against. But I saw it. Whatever happened in that face when Tash said the word for safe, I saw it. And there is only one word I have for it. Relief. Absolute, complete, 4 centuries deep relief. It closed its eyes, just for a moment, just for a breath. Like something that had been held for 400 years, had been allowed to put itself down. Then it opened its eyes, and it nodded, that gesture meaning something universal between us. Apparently, because we understood it and it understood ours. That single up-down motion of the head that means yes. That means I understand. That means somehow across the vast gulf of biology and distance and 4 centuries of silence. Okay. Chapter 12. From the Official Contact Report of Commander SNVOSS. Day 21 of Contact, Comprehensive Event Summary. On Day 17, following a revival process that took significantly longer than the initial subject, due to the extended duration of suppression and the medical complexity of multiple simultaneous revivals, all 6 occupants of the second compartment were brought to stable waking status. 5 were what the first subject appeared to recognize as crew members, 2 injured prior to hibernation, based on the evidence of medical treatment we found within the module, with old injuries that had been stabilized but not fully treated. 1 appeared to be very young, significantly younger than the others. A child. The 6th. I am going to address the 6th directly. The 6th was not biological. The 6th was mechanical, constructed, a device of considerable sophistication, approximately bipedal in form, clearly designed to function alongside the biological crew members, equipped with systems that Dahlan assessed as including life support assistance, medical monitoring, and physical support capabilities. It was not functioning when we found it. Its power systems had been depleted at some point during the 4 centuries. The first subject, when awake and sufficiently communicative to address the question, indicated through Tash's ongoing translation work, which was by Day 17 reaching a level of basic communicative utility, that the device had given its power reserves to the life support systems when the module's primary energy supply had failed. The device had given its power to keep the others alive. And the soldier, and I am using that word deliberately now, because Tash had by Day 20 identified sufficient vocabulary to confirm both the species' self-designation and the subject's apparent professional role, and that role was most closely rendered in Galactic Common as something between warrior and guardian, but the word that felt most accurate after extensive consultation with the language team was soldier. The soldier had positioned himself, before hibernation took hold, between the external hatch and the interior compartment, between the outside world and his crew. I filed the full report on Day 21. I filed everything. I did not editorialize in the official report. Official reports are data. But this supplementary record is not an official report, and so I will say this here. I have been a survey commander for 19 years. I have made contact with more systems, more debris fields, more remnants of past civilizations than I can accurately count. I have found dead things and dying things and things that were alive in ways I did not recognize at first. I have never found anything like this. I have been trying to write this part for 3 days. I keep starting it and stopping it, because the things I want to say are not the kinds of things that appear in official documents, and I am aware that this record is going to be read by a very large number of people, and the language has to be careful, and the claims have to be supportable. But the council asked for honesty, so on day 27, Reedon asked me to walk with him to the viewport. He had been cleared for limited movement by Dahlon, and he moved carefully but steadily, still adapting to the physical reality of being awake in a body that had been dormant for 4 centuries. He had begun wearing one of the recovery garments Dahlon had improvised, because his suit needed significant repair work, but in the medical area, he had somehow managed to find a way to carry himself that was entirely his own, upright in a way that was not performance, that was simply structure. The way some people have a quality of being in a room that makes you aware of them even when they are quiet. He stood at the viewport for a while without saying anything. The margin was visible, the deep dark of that part of space, sparse stars, very little else. Then he pointed at the viewport and said a word. He had been learning galactic common words at an extraordinary rate. By day 27, we were communicating in a mix of his language and mine, filling gaps with gesture and expression and the occasional creative approximation. And the word he said was one of the galactic common words he had recently learned. The word was vast. Vast, he said, looking at the dark. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. You go into it, he said. More complex sentence structure now, he was getting there quickly. Your people, you go into it looking. Looking for things, I said, for others. For things that are there, that we don't know about yet. Like us, he said. Like you. He looked at the dark for a long time after that. We were going to do that, he said finally. My people, there were plans before the conflict, plans to go out looking. And now, he thought about this. 400 years, he said. They have had 400 years without us there. Maybe, he paused, searching for the word. Maybe they went anyway. Maybe they did. Maybe they are out there somewhere, looking. He pressed his hand flat against the viewport glass. Just rested it there, flat, against the barrier between here and the vast. Then I hope they find someone like you, he said. I did not write this in my official log. I wrote it here, in my personal notes, because it belongs here, in the space where I am allowed to be a person responding to an extraordinary thing, not a specialist cataloging data. He hoped his people found someone like us. Someone who would open the module. The following is a summary of key determinations made by the Council following comprehensive review of all contact materials submitted by the crew of GEA research vessel Severance Bloom. 1. Species designation update. The species previously designated H7741 in the Precontact Archive has been reclassified to H7741 active contact, pending formal species designation assignment through the Standard Integration Protocol. At the request of the primary contact subject, the species' own self-designation has been recorded phonemically and provided to the Galactic Common Language Committee for official integration. The species refers to themselves, in their own language, by a term that translates most closely as the ones who stay. The Council has noted, for the historical record, the remarkable convergence between this self-designation and the behavior of the primary contact subject as observed by the Severance Bloom crew. 2. Technology assessment. The life support technology integrated into the escape module designated Delta Shelter has been assessed by the GEA Technology Review Board as significantly advanced in the specific domain of long-term biological suspension. In several other domains, propulsion, communication, materials science, the technology appears broadly comparable to early galactic common standards. This assessment has been flagged for further study. The implication that a precontact species would have developed such sophisticated hibernation technology without comparable advances in other areas, may indicate either a specific evolutionary or cultural prioritization of certain technological pathways, or alternatively, that the technology in the module was developed under urgent circumstances and represents a non-typical example of the species' general technological level. 3. The mechanical unit, ongoing. GEA engineers in collaboration with the Severance Bloom crew are working to restore the mechanical unit found in the module's second compartment. Progress has been described as promising by the lead engineer on the project. The primary contact subject, Reedon, has been involved in technical consultations, as the unit's architecture is partially familiar to him. The Council notes that the subject's sustained interest in the restoration of the mechanical unit provides an additional point of behavioral data, suggesting that the H7741 species forms significant social bonds across biological and constructed intelligences, a characteristic not common in the species catalog and considered highly notable. 4. Communication with the H7741 home world. This matter has been referred to the First Contact Initiation Committee for standard review. The subject has provided coordinates and contextual information that allow us to pinpoint the H7741 home system with high confidence. The question of whether and how to initiate contact with the home world of a species whose only known extrasolar representative is a single escape module found after 4 centuries is a matter of significant ethical and procedural complexity. The committee is deliberating. Timeline: indeterminate. 5. The child. One of the 6 occupants of the second compartment is a juvenile by H7741 biological standards. This subject has been designated Lyra based on the name used by the other crew members. The Council notes that Lyra was among the first to achieve full communicative capacity in Galactic Common, outpacing even the remarkable language acquisition rate of the primary subject. The Council further notes that Lyra has, in the weeks since revival, become something of a fixture on the Severance Bloom, to the degree that Commander Essen Voss has reportedly found it necessary to establish formal protocols governing Lyra's access to various sections of the vessel, specifically the flight deck and the engineering bays. This has not been entirely successful. Lyra figured out how to get into the engineering bay on day 31. I know because I found her in there at the end of my shift, sitting on a tool case, talking to Chief Engineer Morin about the propulsion system. Morin is a taciturn individual at the best of times and not known for patience with disruptions to the work environment, and I was prepared for a difficult situation when I came through the door. Morin was showing Lyra how the gravitational coupling worked. Lyra had apparently asked a question about the drive system that Morin described afterward as not bad for someone who just woke up from 400 years in a box, which, coming from Morin, is essentially a standing ovation. She was 12 years old. By H7741 standards, Dahlan had determined this through biological assessment, and Reedon had confirmed it. She was 12 years old and she had been asleep for 4 centuries, and she had woken up in a vessel full of beings she had never seen before, with a language she didn't know, in a part of space her people had never reached. And she was sitting on a tool case, asking Morin about gravitational coupling. Reedon found this less surprising than the rest of us. She is always like that, he told me, during one of our language sessions, in a tone of voice that was simultaneously proud and resigned in a ratio that I recognized from every adult I had ever known who was responsible for a very smart child. Were you responsible for her before, I asked, in the conflict? Her family was, they were gone early in the conflict. He paused. She was placed with my unit for evacuation. For getting her out. So she was the priority, I said. He thought about that for a moment. They all were, he said. They were all the priority, that is he searched for the word. That is the job. The ones in your care are the priority, all of them. But she especially, I said. He was quiet for a moment. She reminds me of, he stopped, started again. There were things lost in the conflict before we left, people, I knew her family. He stopped again. You don't have to. She is good, he said. She has the quality of making everything around her slightly more alive. That is not a translation problem. I mean it exactly. She makes things more alive. He paused. I wanted her to get to grow up. That was all. I just wanted her to get to grow up. He said it very quietly. I just wanted her to get to grow up. Reedon asked to speak with me directly on day 52. Not through Tash, not in a session. He came to find me at the secondary survey station, where I was, ironically, running the standard third check review of the week's passive sensor sweeps, the same routine I had been doing when I found him. He had gotten very good at Galactic Common by then. Not perfect. There were words he was still working out, and the grammar occasionally went sideways in ways that were charming rather than confusing, but good enough that Tash was not needed for most conversations. He sat down in the chair beside my station without asking, which was a habit he had developed that I appreciated. He was not someone who asked unnecessary permission. You found us, he said. I did. Tell me, he said, what you saw when you saw the readings. So I told him. I told him about the third check sweep, which was my job and which I did not usually find remarkable, and I told him about the numbers that stopped making sense, and I told him about pinging SN Voss and the 14-second pause. I told him about the close approach and the ablative coding and the text on the hull. I told him about the day we opened the hatch. He listened to all of it without interrupting. His face did things throughout, things I had gotten better at reading, though I would never claim expertise. And when I got to the part about his hands on the partition, the position he had been in when we found him, his face went very still. You noticed, he said. It was hard not to notice. I was not conscious. At that point, he thought about the word. I had set myself there before. I do not know how much I was thinking. At the end, before the hibernation took, I was very diminished. But I knew that if anyone came, if there was any chance, I wanted them to have to go through me first. To get to the others. Yes. I nodded. I wasn't sure, he said, at the end if it made sense. It seemed important. It seemed like the only thing that made sense to do. But I did not know if it would matter. I did not know if anyone would ever find us. I did not know if we would. He paused. I did not know anything. I only knew that they were behind the door and I was between the door and whatever might come, and that felt correct. It was correct, I said. He looked at me. The others on your crew, he said. Before the ones who, he hesitated. In your experience, in your years of survey work, have you found things like us before, things in the dark, waiting? I thought about this honestly. Not like you, I said. I have found remnants, things that were left, ships, structures, ruins of things, things that waited without anyone in them. But not with someone still in them. Not with someone still, I gestured, trying to find the word. Standing watch, he said, flat, certain. In Galactic Common, fluent, like he had known the phrase all along, because maybe the concept in his language translated directly and cleanly into this one. Standing watch. Not with someone still standing watch, I said. He was quiet for a moment. 400 years is a long time to stand watch, he said. And then, very quietly, in a way that was not self-pity but was simply true, it did not feel like 400 years. No, I said, I imagine it didn't. It felt like a night, he said. It felt like I went to sleep and then I woke up and they were safe. He looked at his hands. That is all I know about it. It felt like a night. I am adding this supplementary note to the official contact report, because the primary report, in my estimation, captures the facts but not the weight of them. On day 58, the engineering team, working in collaboration with the primary contact subject, restored power to the mechanical unit from the module's second compartment. The restoration process was complex. The unit's architecture was unlike anything in our reference catalog, and the power systems required careful bridging between the unit's specifications and our own supply systems. The unit powered on at 14:22 hours, day 58. The primary contact subject, Reedon, was present in the engineering bay when this happened. I was present. Orvine Thal was present. Tash was present. Chief Engineer Morin was present. Lyra was present, because Lyra is always somehow present for significant events regardless of the protocols in place. The unit powered on. It ran its startup diagnostics, which took approximately 4 minutes. Then it was still. Then it made a sound, not a voice exactly, more a tone, a frequency. Then in H7741 language it said something. Tash translated in real time. The unit said, "Systems nominal, crew status, report." Reedon made a sound that I cannot describe. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they held on to in the dark, when they could not see and could not know, turns out to have been real. He crossed the engineering bay and he put his hand on the unit's shoulder, the equivalent joint, the structure that served that function, and he said something. One word. Tash translated it as the unit's name. The unit had a name. Of course it had a name. Of course Reedon knew it. The unit's optical sensors found him, processed, ran something, a recognition protocol perhaps, or something more than that. Then it said in H7741 something that Tash translated as, duration of suspension, 411 years, 7 months, 14 days, crew status, report. All present, Reedon said, in Galactic Common, because he was speaking partly for us, I think, partly so we understood. All accounted for. Perimeter status, the unit said. Secure, Reedon said. The unit's sensors swept the room, taking in the crew of the Severance Bloom, the engineering bay, the situation. Processing 4 centuries of elapsed time in the span of a few seconds. Understood, it said, then after a pause, good. I have 19 years of survey command. I have found many things. I have never, before or since, heard a word carry so much as that word carried in that moment. Good. They asked me to write a closing statement for the archival record. I have been writing this thing for 72 days, and now they want a closing statement. I want to say that everything I said above is true, all of it. I did not make anything prettier or more dramatic than it was. If anything, I made it less dramatic, because the actual experience was the kind of thing that resists being put into words, and I have done my best, but my best is limited. I want to say that the thing I found in the third check sweep, the thing that stopped making sense, was the most important anomaly I will ever flag in 11 years of survey work. Probably in my career, probably in my life. I want to say that Essen Voss was right to go in for close approach, and right to file the full contact report immediately, and right to wait for authorization and run the level 4 protocols and proceed carefully. Everything she did was right. I want to say something about Reedon, specifically. About the way he positioned himself before the hibernation took him. Between the outside world and the people in his care, not knowing if anyone would ever come, not knowing if the position would matter, just knowing that it was the correct thing to do with his body in the final moments of consciousness before the dark took him, just placing himself between. I have thought about this more than I can easily quantify. I am not a soldier. I am a survey specialist. I check things for the 3rd time so that the important things do not get missed. That is my function. And I find it meaningful, genuinely. I have always found it meaningful, but it is not the same kind of thing. I think about what it means to put yourself between the world and whoever is behind the door. And to hold that position not through courage, not through conscious will because consciousness was gone, but through the positioning of a body before consciousness went, through a choice made in the last moments of wakefulness that said, "Here, I will be here, whatever comes." 400 years. He said it felt like a night. I have been on survey missions that felt like years. I have been away from home for stretches that felt much longer than they were. I understand in a limited way the distortion that time does to the experience of duration. But I have never held a position in the dark for 400 years. I have never woken up in the hands of strangers and asked, before I asked anything else, whether the people behind the door were safe. We found them, they are safe. That is the whole story, that is every word of it. We found them, in the dark, in a small sealed module tumbling end over end in the emptiness of Sector 7 Theta Margin. And the soldier inside had made himself a door between the world and the ones he was given to protect, and they were all alive, and he had kept his word to them across 4 centuries of dark. And when we opened it, he woke up asking one question. Are they safe? That is the story. That is the whole story.